Hello, everybody. It's George from Ireland. Welcome back to my channel. So I'm commenting it once again on the Russia's illegal war of unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. It's coming up for a year now. Today being the 15th of February, and it was the 24th of February last year when this war began on a full scale, which obviously the Russian regime is lying about, won't even admit that it is a war. But in a sense, it's been going on for 9 years, not just for 1 year. But anyhow, so the Russians obviously concentrating on the Bakhmut area, uh, and some people think that the spring offensive has already begun, because the Secretary General of NATO said a few days ago he thinks this actually is the spring offensive, because obviously fighting never completely stopped in winter, but it was just as a lower tempo, harder to go further forward. I mean, unless you've got really good Arctic gear, you don't want to be outside for that many hours. It's just, you have to wear thicker clothes, which drains your energy. It's just heavier. You're slower in some ways. But when it's properly frozen, that's sometimes actually easy and sometimes a bit faster than when it's really muddy. You can be stuck in the mud just walking, or vehicles can. So there was always some movement, even in the bleak midwinter. But was becoming the thoughts actually speeding up a little bit, and there was a lot of bombardment. Now the bombardment's gone down a bit. Now I heard some Putinite try to excuse the bombardment of the electric power grid on the basis of, oh well, it's disabling the trains. But if you wanted to stop the Ukrainians trains going, why not just destroy the trains? Why not just blow up the railway line? It's a lot easier. Use far less in terms of munitions. Just get any soldier, put a bomb on the railway line, blow it up. That's it. And now, a better way to do it would be to obviously blow up tunnels or bridges, because they could take months to repair. But hitting the electricity is gonna affect the civilians. So even if that's a permissible military tactic, destroying railway lines, and I think it is actually, one could do that without harming civilians. Um, anyway, so it seems that the Russian offensive has been kicked into increasingly high gear, and I suspect Russia's been impelled to go ahead with this a bit prematurely. They know they're not quite ready. Their ill preparedness last February was blatant. Remember that, to delay it 8 days from their planned invasion date. But this time, again, they're having to go off half cocked, partly because they're worried about those Western tanks. A few hundred Western tanks, the Challenger tanks, the Leopard 2 tanks. I remember there's that warehouse in Belgium where controversially they've discovered scores of Leopard 1 tanks belonging to a private collector who is willing to sell them on to foreign governments like Sweden or whoever who might want to pass them on to Ukraine. Admittedly, if I was NATO, I would say one of the price of you joining Sweden is you're going to have to give all these, a lot of equipment to Ukraine. But incidentally, Sweden and Finland's NATO application is being held up by Turkey, which is blocking it, saying, "Oh, a Quran was burnt there." The Swedes say, "Well, under our civil liberties, we can't prevent that, and you have to expel all these Kurdish organizations and dub them terrorist organizations." And the Swedes think that this is intruding on human rights too much. But what could be done is there could be sort of a bilateral US-Swedish treaty, or maybe trilateral British, Swedish, American, various countries with Sweden and or Finland, excluding Turkey and any ones that are going to be awkward. But so anyway, it seems that Vuhledar is the vortex of the war right now. A town a bit over 100 kilometers from uh, oh my god, Bakhmut, this mining town in the Donetsk region. So the Ukrainians have been keen to show footage of various vehicles, which they say are burnt out Russian military vehicles, and indeed that appears to be the case. And the corpses of what seem to be Russian soldiers lying around about. So some units are thought to be used heavily in this. The 76th Air Assault Division is the Russian unit probably going to be used there. So paratroopers are really the crack troops of the Russian army. The 55th Guards Naval Infantry Brigade and the 40th Naval Infantry Brigade, they'll be called Marines in most militaries. They've been used, and a lot of that, some of that tanks and infantry fighting vehicles have been destroyed. And it's interesting what's said on the Russian side. If you look at this a Russian news site, 7x7, and it said that in a company of approximately 100 soldiers, only 8 men were still alive. So you think the Russian media, are being rather censored, wouldn't say that unless that were true. Now, we can't assume typicality. That's probably reported because it's just so shocking. But yeah, notice that the Russian losses are significant. And I'm not saying that the Ukrainian losses are painless. They're suffering as well. But the Russians are showing a complete disregard for human life, as they usually do. We outnumber the Ukrainians 3.5 to 1. They're thinking on our advantage is numerical superiority, not technological superiority or just better soldiering or anything. So if we lose 3 soldiers to their 1, we'll still win. If we lose 4 soldiers to their 1, that's a bit more dicey for them. But the Ukrainians obviously determined this is not a war of choice. This is an imposed war. It's a war of national survival. Russia, however absurd Putin's lies are, no, it's not a war of survival. For Russia, Putin has never claimed that that Ukraine wants even an inch of Ukrainian of Russian soil, or that they fired a shot at Russia before, of course, he invaded. And now he's lying and pretending that Ukrainian territory is Russian and changing maps, saying it's extremist to tell the truth, to use the maps that Russia itself was producing until a few weeks ago, showing Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk, and so forth as part of Ukraine. Admittedly, they changed their mind on Crimea a few years earlier because until 2014, even Russia acknowledged that Ukraine lawfully possessed Crimea, and then the Russian regime started lying about that one. All right, and I know this territory wouldn't be the first time that Lome has changed hands through force, but times have changed. We've got international laws developed further. We've all agreed not to do this. But noticeably, some pro-Putin bloggers, Grey Zone and so on, who's thought to be close to Wagner, he's been posting on Telegram, and he's been really lacerating the Russian army, saying that the top brass is incompetent, and Yegor Girkin likewise. So it shows the disillusionment and the disarray on the Russian side. So they're attacking an awful lot, and the Ukrainians have laid landmines, and the Russians don't have sufficient demining equipment to detect and destroy the mines. So they sometimes get blown up by landmines, or they somehow find a gap in it. Just happenstance. They luckily get across. The serendipitous action means that others are going to follow the very same path because they know there are no mines there. But on the other hand, they're a sitting duck because they're one after another. Very, very easy to shoot down. So anyway, so Yevgeny Prigozhin, that charming chap, and he's obviously throwing more jailbirds into the fray. Now, in fairness, you might be totally innocent in Russia and sent to prison anyway. So some of them not necessarily bad people. You can be just sent to prison, well, actually, for doing a good thing, for telling the truth, for campaigning for human rights. But some of those are going to be flung into the fray. But anyway, the Ukrainian supply lines to Bakhmut appear to be jeopardized. And I suspect this is the spring offensive already, because at what point do these trivial attacks become an actual offensive? I'm not a military person, got no military experience whatsoever, but many of the experts say that it's now. So it seems that the Ukrainian have blunted the Russian defensive capability quite a lot. It's been degraded because they've lost a lot of their precious assets. And these Oryx Dutch open source analysts say that about 1,800 Russian tanks have either been destroyed or captured. Now, they have replaced a lot of those from those which are in storage, but often they're inferior models, decades old, not been well maintained, been in storage for decades. So the Russian losses appear to be sort of off the charts, very difficult to keep up with because there are just so many of them. Anyway, so Russia's really trying to just be in command, to be driving this, be the one moving forward, and not have the Ukrainians able to launch their own spring offensive. So obviously Russia's thrown some troops in with no training, but others it has trained. So yeah, I mean the weapons for Ukraine can't be get there really soon enough. It is quite a worrying situation for Ukraine. All right. Well, anyway, thank you for watching. Please donate to me on PayPal, georgecallahan79 at gmail.com, and follow me on Patreon. Goodbye.